Well, welcome to the Stone Cottage. Today we're going to be talking about free ways to get plants for your garden. They actually do exist. And I'm also going to be giving you half a dozen tips for ways to save money on plants. And let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to combine that with a little bit of a tour of the garden. Now, right here, that is my mock orange that is blooming. And tip number one I'm going to give you is compost. Now, this plant actually came with the house, but it was a little nothing. And we bought the house in 2015, and it did not bloom for the first 5 years. But I'm convinced the reason it began to bloom and to grow like crazy, so this thing's obviously huge, it's because my husband is a die-hard composter. And you can see this thing, my neighbor I tell her my plant likes her better than it likes me, but it creates a beautiful show on the pathway. Now, one free tip is keep your eyes open. My yard is too shady for daylilies. I've given daylilies to all of my neighbors, and now I'm at the point where absolute strangers can have daylilies because I've got a boatload of daylilies. So keep your eyes open for free plants. And if you say, oh, that never happens, I'm just telling you, I see it all the time where they have free plants just by the side of the road. So that's another one. Another tip is get to know your neighbors. Like I'm digging these out and I say to my neighbors, anybody want these plants? And I know the gardening neighbors. So if you go outside and walk around on a regular basis on a pretty day in the springtime, you'll get to know your neighbors. And when that happens, they'll know if you are interested in gardening, and they'll be happy to share plants with you. While we're here, I'll go ahead and show you the Baptisia. And this is a perennial, and it can be propagated by division. So the next category of freebies is propagating. Now, propagating just means to make baby plants. So I'm going to come over here and talk about some plants that I propagate the simple way, which is seeding. Everybody knows you grow baby plants from seeds, right? Well, this particular lupin was from seeds that I had in my home in Colorado, and this is not a good place to grow lupin. But I put probably 5,000 seeds, and this one actually survived. And I think this is just a good location. Now, last year when it bloomed, I made sure all the seeds went down, and that little teeny plant right there with the little, what is it? Looks like 6 leaves on it, a little star-shaped kind of leaf. That, somebody ate on it. It looks like they chewed on it. That is a little seedling from the lupin. So that's one of my favorites to grow from seed, because when you buy it and transplant it, it does not survive. I've tried that, it didn't work. Now, the next one that is a great one to seed is foxglove. These foxglove have not started to flower yet. These are going to be a little bit later this year. I do have some in the back, and I'll walk you back there and I'll show you the foxglove. But foxglove seed are just the teeniest little things you've ever seen. You can take the foxglove seed and sprout them one summer in some little recycled plastic containers, little plastic pots, and then plant them out in the late summer and allow them to grow, and then the next year they will flower. These are biennials. You plant them one year, they flower the next. Oh, There is a little foxglove starting to bloom right there. I don't know if you can see, the color is a pale yellow. Close up. Okay, that's the little foxglove here. Now, I'll take you back around. So we'll walk down the path here. Oh, this is meadow rue, which gets big and floppy. Now, it has been raining, and so my yard kind of feels a bit like a wet dog. Other fun things that are blooming. This is Amsonia. This is another plant that was not blooming. It came with the house, but it was not blooming. And a lot of compost later, it actually started to bloom. And at that point, I could identify it. And my flowers look a little, again, a little wet and floppy here, but that works well. The Edgeworthia, again, did not do well, but with the compost, it grew like crazy. I'm gonna walk you back so you can see. And we are still about a week away from prime foxglove season, but here it is beginning to bloom, and there are a bunch of them in here. I sadly have a lot of daffodil leaves that are really hanging on, but there will be my foxglove coming up. Now, another plant that I'm growing from seed hellebores. Now, the hellebores actually will go to seed, and around them, little baby plants will occur. And I have taken some of the hellebore seedlings that occur just around one of my plants in particular. They just went crazy, blooming like sprouting like crazy, and I want to put them in other areas in the garden, so I'm taking them and putting them in some little plastic containers here, and I'll set them where I want some more hellebores. Now, the next thing, as long as I'm right here, is cuttings. Now, one of my favorite things to use a plant for is these are oak leaf hydrangeas. This one I bumped and broke it off, and you can see I have 3 of them in there. 2 of them did not survive, but this one is actually taking. So I will get an oak leaf hydrangea. Now, if you think, oh, that'll take forever. Yeah, I probably will have to nurse it for a couple of years before it turns into anything decent. Well, let me show you what happened a couple of years ago. This is my hydrangea, a macrophylla hydrangea. I accidentally cut off a branch that I thought was dead. I stuck it in the ground. Stuck it in a pot is what I did, because I wanted to baby it. And here, 2 years later, it's about 16 inches tall, and it has 2 flowers on it. There are plenty of things that grow easily from cuttings. So, hydrangeas grow easily. Another one that grows pretty readily is sedums, and I can take these, pinch them back, simply stick them in the ground like I did last week, and these will grow quite readily. A shrub that there's absolutely no killing is the aucuba. Stays green all year long. and I can simply take these, cut them. I put them inside in a container for decoration inside my house. I can do it in the dead of winter, so I have something fresh and green. They will put on roots, and then you can stick them in the ground. Boxwood will do this. Another one that you can do is calanchas. Any of the things that look kind of like succulents will easily take cuttings and grow. Now, another way to grow plants is from runners. Just in case you have a hard time growing vinca, vinca is a terrific plant that grows from runners. Sends out these little branches here. They take hold and you get lots of little plants. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily want vinca. They think it's invasive. That's okay. You don't have to do that. But runners are a classic way that plants propagate. Now, here is a plant that is new to my garden, and this is a brunnera. It grows well in the shade, and it has little runners. Now, I'm going to give you a money-saving tip along with a freebie tip. A really good way to find inexpensive plants is to shop in the fall. Nurseries are trying to get rid of their inventory, and so they'll mark it down. And this brunnera, which was like a $22 plant, rather expensive in my book for just one little plant, but what had happened is this particular plant started to look a little ratty, and so they were having a hard time selling it. They put it on the markdown, so it was half off, and they had a number of them that were half off, and I looked for the one that had the most little plantlets on it, and this had 4 or 5 little plantlets on it, so that's the one I wanted. And of course, it's looking quite nice now, thank you very much. But brunnera grows from runners. Another one, just in case you think a shrub might not be doing this, this shrub is Virginia sweet spire. I'll put the scientific name on the screen here, because sometimes common names get used strangely. But this guy sends up all kinds of runners. So you can see all of these are volunteers. And I have a neighbor who is redoing the landscape in her yard, and I've told her she can come anytime she wants. And she'll come over and she'll just send me a text message, I've been in your yard, and she is taking out some of these that are growing in awkward spots. So I have her trained to do my plant control, which I think is pretty amazing. She thinks it's great because she gets free plants. I think it's great because someone's doing my plant control. So remember that tip? Get to know the other gardeners, and you might find yourself on the receiving end of a lot of free plants. Now, this one is also showing another way that plants propagate, which is layering. Now you can see that's a branch. The branch touched the ground, and where it touched the ground, it's establishing roots. And once the roots are established, you can cut it off, and that becomes a completely new plant. And I am doing something similar to that up here with my Edgeworthia. And I've shown this before. My Edgeworthia grows at quite an angle because this is such a shady spot. So it's trying to get to the sun. And this lower branch hits on the ground. It's particularly true right in there. And there is the rest of the plant here. And it's touching the ground. And I can tell already it's getting some roots. And I can take that and cut it off. And I could transplant that to a different location in the garden. That branch right there that's touching the ground underneath the pulmonaria, it could be so thick it might not send out roots. But if it does, I can just cut off that entire branch and have another plant. So that's called layering, when a branch hits the ground and develops roots, which is another way to propagate a plant. And the classic way to do baby plants out of big plants is something called division. Now, this thing right here, well, that big leaf, that's the Mayapple, but back behind it, that is acanthus. And this acanthus has gotten quite large. You can see he's starting to put on some blooms. But these can be simply divided, and you can kind of see, so it looks like there's one plant back here, another plant here. These kind of create a whirl. Another plant here, maybe another one there. This could be as many as half a dozen plants that could be taken out and divided if I wanted to put it someplace else in the yard. Now this one's in the happiest spot because it gets the most sun here, but I may have 20 individual plants right here that could easily be divided. A classic plant to divide is a hosta. Now, if you pay attention to my videos, see that patch of dirt right there? That was Mortha hosta, but it was really crowding the rose there. The rose is actually blooming up high, but down low it was crowding it. So I removed that and stuck it in the back there. Now I'm filling this spot. This area right here has historically had lots of stuff growing in it. Had a lot of ivy along the back, and that hosta filled up an ivy spot. And it had a boatload of daylilies. And I still have some daylilies in here, but they are close to some foxglove, so I have not removed the ones that are close to the foxglove. I'll do that later in the year. But when I removed the daylilies that were not blooming because it's too shady, when I removed the ivy, I suddenly had a lot of space back in here. And I put in some heuchera because I knew that would grow. Now, these heuchera were purchased late in the season. I bought them online from Jackson Perkins, and because it was late in the season, they marked down the plants. That's very, very common. So that's where those came from. So a tip for buying plants at a good price is buy them late in the season. The perennials do not mind these even, keep leaves over the winter time in our area. And I have another little one. Don't give up on a plant just because it's little. This is another type of heuchera that I thought had not survived, but it's going to make it, I think. So don't give up on little tiny plants. These are heucherella that I actually bought just this year at the Home Depot. And when you start to buy plants at big box stores, sometimes the prices are really good, but do be careful. So here's my next tip for buying at places that do not have, what shall I say, conscientious, experienced gardeners necessarily taking care of the plants. Now, at a gardening center, they hire gardeners, and they are very knowledgeable, and they take really good care, and you pay for the plants because of that. Sometimes it's worth it to buy them there because you'll get a better product. But when I'm buying at a big box store, I like to buy as soon as the shipments come in. So these particular heucherella came from early shipments, and I'm very, very picky to make sure they look good. And if you're not sure when the orders are coming in, go ahead and ask. It's perfectly acceptable to ask, when do your shipments arrive? A lot of times it'll be Thursdays, so that they'll be all ready for the weekend. But you want to shop early while the plants, first of all, you'll get a better selection. Secondly, the plants will not have been neglected for several days and look pitiful. So they will come from the nursery, from the greenhouse, looking better. So shop as soon as the plants come. Now, a classic example of that, that's a heuchera right there, and that particular heuchera came from Trader Joe's. And I knew that Trader Joe's had them, so I asked, it was just the cashier. I said, when do the plant shipments come in? She said, Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. So I go on the days that the shipments come later in the day, so I can get the pick of what's growing. So that's another tip to save money. Now, another tip that you may or may not have picked up on here. Oh, look. I showed you the big one, but these two back here, those all came from the same spot where I cleared out. This is the hosta that's under the rose. So I got 3 plants out of that one spot. So transplanting things from someplace else in your yard. This one, I'll show you where he came from in just a minute. So all of these hostas, 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess I've got 4 hostas in here now, and I'm not finished, but this is just where I am. All came from existing hostas that I divided. And most herbaceous perennials can easily be divided. Now, this is the spot in my yard where the pond is going to go. And I've told you before that I was going to take plants out. There used to be a nice big hosta here. Here, there were some painted ferns. And here, this hosta was a lot bigger. And that blue hosta that I showed you on the other side, that's part of this plant. It was huge. And I actually left that part because I had a hard time getting up next to those cinder blocks. And I thought, I think this area will be safe. I'm not completely finished. Here's another hosta here. There's a fern back over in there. These are violets. And I don't know that these grow wild. I think it will naturalize very readily here. So I don't know that I'll bother to dig those out or save them or anything, but one of my neighbors wanted to come by and take out some violets. Have at it. Now, the way I do these plants is I use something called a spading fork. And you can find them at a hardware store, you can order them online. But a spade, of course, is a shovel, and a spading fork kind of is a cross between a shovel and a fork. And it gets down underneath the plant, and it's easier for me to work with, because it doesn't require, first of all, it doesn't require as much strength from me. And secondly, it kind of tiptoes around the roots, and that's probably the best reason to do it, is it tiptoes around those roots. And the roots from the hostas are not that deep. It's not like that evil Rose of Sharon. That is not being saved. That is being taken out and thrown away. But this I take, and once the pond goes in, I want these hostas to go back. So what I'm doing is I'm putting them in pots. Now that's a pretty good sized pot. This was from the corner here. One huge, one quite large, and that little piece just, was on the side after I dug everything out. So I've got 3 plants that I can put anywhere I want. And I think I'll put that little one someplace, tuck him someplace kind of interesting and nice away, and then save some of the bigger ones for around the pond. Here are my painted ferns, and you can see that is the wild violets. And I went ahead and left the wild violets. That one has a little bit of vinca in here, and if I wanted to clean up that bed, I would have taken those out. But I'm going to reintroduce the violets and the vinca back into the bed. And the thing I've learned, this was one plant, and when I went to dig it out, this is another one that uses runners. Painted ferns use runners. A lot of ferns you just divide, but this one has runners, so it made 3 different plants. And all 3 of these are as large as the original plant that I had planted in here. And this plant had not done that well. It's been here for maybe 5 or 6 years, and it didn't really take off. And the reason is because the soil in this area has not been amended as much, because we knew we were not going to move on. We were not going to do any heavy planting right here because of our plans. But as a result, the soil was not as good. So painted ferns really, really like to have good compost. So these are planted in some pretty heavy compost, and I'm hoping they'll just take off because they really add a nice lightness to it. Now over here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants here, quite large, all of them. That's the smallest one of the bunch, but all 4 of those are quite large plants. And I took part of this one and planted it up where the daylilies came out. So this is a great way. All of these hostas around my yard have been transplanted. Another tip is if you have a plant that's not in a good spot. This plant is Carya japonica, and it's been cut back and potted here. It was growing on the side of my house and really blocking everything. So the flow was not real good, and my husband probably would have just cut it out completely and thrown it in the trash. And I said, no, that's actually a good plant. So we've taken it and I've put it in a pot here, and this is going to go with my waterfall because its stems stay green, so it makes a pretty little green swoopy effect all winter long with its pretty green stems. And transplanting something so that it's in a better spot is a good thing, because maybe it's growing well, but it's not a good spot. Transplant it. These were the most pitiful little hostas you could ever imagine. They were stuck in a spot that was probably 2 or 3 inches wide, and they never grew because they were so constrained. We put them here, and they took off because they finally had some room to breathe. And I've shown this part of my shade garden before. These were all plants that came with the house. And it didn't look like there were that many hostas in this yard because they were not planted where they could grow well. They did not have good soil. So again, composting and dividing, putting them where they have room to grow, you might find there's a lot more in your yard than you know. Now, this is not blooming yet. It should be blooming pretty soon. This is my rhododendron. And again, did not bloom for years. Only started blooming a couple years ago, again, because of the compost. Be free with the compost. Once a year, put down 1 inch of compost, and pretty soon you'll have the worms taking that compost down, and your garden will be looking ever so much better. This is going to be a strange tip, but this tip is, you know, all those seasonal plants, things that you might have received as a gift? These are, poinsettias from Christmas. And they still have some red leaves on them. But what's going to happen is, you can see the red leaves are dropping. And I put this in a pot with some elephant ears. And elephant ears need something at ground level because they grow up high and the ground around them has nothing growing. So the elephant ears are around the edge, and this poinsettia is in the middle, and it will provide a little greenery. And as the red leaves drop, the green leaves will simply take over. But in the meantime, a little bit of extra color in the garden, a little unexpected seasonal color. And I've done the same thing here. They're going to be elephant ears, but in the meantime, we have some poinsettias giving us a little bit of extra splash of color. Now, think about other plants that you might receive as a house plant or a gift of some type. And over here. Now this looks pretty ratty, so you're like, why would you show anybody that? That's pretty hideous. This is a kalanchoe. Very, very common houseplant gift. And I reach a point where I'm kind of sick of them, so I quit taking care of them. But they root very readily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that, and I had this little container here on the wall, and it doesn't have enough soil to do much, but the kalanchoe will do well. And I leave it out. It looks like it's starting to put on some little flower buds, but I leave it out all summer. I take cuttings off of it, and by the end of summer, it doesn't look too bad. And then I can neglect it all winter long, bring it back outside, and it perks back up. But this has been around for several years, and it is totally neglected. But I can get some interesting plants out of it. And this particular container here, it's ivy that was pulled out. And I don't mind having ivy in a container, but back behind it is one of those little evergreens that they sell for, I don't know, $6.99, $8.99, something like that. At Home Depot, they put a really tacky little red bow on it right around Thanksgiving time, and they sell it as Christmas decorations. And that's a pretty inexpensive way to fill a pot. And I have the ivy coming over it and the evergreen, and that is a really cheap little plastic pot that I bought some plant in over the years. So this is a very dramatic, tall, kind of a container that's made with bits and bobs of things that most people would have just tossed out. Another one. How many of us have received for Mother's Day? It's classic Mother's Day gift is a hydrangea in a plastic pot with, colorful shiny paper wrapped around it. And that's what this was. It was a Mother's Day gift maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And my feeling was, if it lives, it lives. If it doesn't live, I'm not going to worry about it. So I stuck it in the ground, and it did absolutely nothing for the first 4 or 5 years. So finally last year I said to it in no uncertain terms, you either give me a bloom or you're coming out. And it put up the most pitiful little bloom in the back, right back in here. You could hardly see it, but it got the message. This year I said, well, I appreciate the fact you gave me a bloom, but if you can't get with it, you're coming out. And it heard me. Look at what a good plant this is. It probably has a dozen different blooms on it, and this was probably in most households something intended for the garbage. And now I have a hydrangea. As I recall, it was a really pretty color of hydrangea. Propagating. The number one way to garden for free is to propagate. Nobody had nurseries back thousands of years ago when people started the beginnings of civilization. That's when gardening occurred. And people figured out some things grow from seeds. Some things have little runners that I can cut off a little plant. Some things, if I take a cutting, it'll grow. And it'll send out little roots and I can make a little plant. Some things I can use division. Some things where they touch the ground, they'll take root. And other things, planted in the wrong spot, they don't do well. But when I put them in the right spot, they do well. That is the number one way to get plants for free, is to act like an old-fashioned gardener looking for plants to plant and not buying things. Getting to know experienced gardeners, either in your neighborhood or through a garden club. My recommendation, find older gardeners. They spend more time in their garden, they're patient, and they're happy to teach what they've learned over the years to younger gardeners. And they will happily share their plants and their knowledge. Use compost. Use lots and lots of compost. And the other thing is to use recycled materials when you are doing your hardscaping. Now, a lot of the larger stones were here in the yard, but very poorly utilized. The bricks came from a neighbor across the street. Again, because I was outside a lot and I got to know my neighbors. One of my neighbors had a driveway that was paved in bricks, and over the years it had buckled because of roots, and they were taking it all out, and they were getting ready to sell their house, and they took out all of these bricks and were stacking them up because they were going to put down concrete pavement. And as I walked by, I simply said, "What are you going to do with all those bricks?" And they kind of gave me we'll get rid of them. And I said, would you like me to haul them away for you? These bricks were for free. So recycled materials are an excellent way. The stones up in the stone pathway, again, were recycled. We have bought extremely little in the way of hardscape materials. Most of it has been like sand and paver base, that type of thing. But the other thing to do too is we've been collecting rocks. Now you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or Garden Center, and you can buy bags of rocks. Why would I buy bags of rocks when I have them all over the place? Anytime I encounter a rock, I save the rock. I just kind of set it on the pathway, and then at the end of my gardening session, I'll bring it over and I'll contribute it. This is going to be what we use to make our pond. And we don't have to buy bags because we already have all the rocks we need. I don't know where you live, but most of us have plenty of rocks. So be sure to use recycled hardscape materials. Some other things that will help you save money, in addition to buying plants right after they arrive, buying things at the end of the season in the fall and planting them. You can also do things like choose native plants as much as possible. They'll require much less water. Anything that you have to irrigate, you are continuing to spend water on. And you may say, oh, well, we have a well. We don't need to worry about water. We can water all we want. Well, that water is coming from somewhere, probably from an aquifer that's taken millions of years to get that underground river that you're tapping into. And by diminishing our aquifers, that's not good for our planet. So local native plants as much as possible. Much easier to grow and much less water. Limit the use of annuals. Annuals are where we spend money that it's like we buy them and we know, here are my annuals. At the end of the year, oh, the freeze comes, the annuals die. Or I can take my annuals, if I have a limited number of annuals, I can take them inside and overwinter them. And I do that a lot. But wherever possible, bring them inside and use them again. Don't keep buying them and throwing them away at the end of the season. And you may be saying, but what about my pots? I need something in my pot. Try putting in something like a boxwood or one of the small leafed hollies, like pencil hollies, that type of thing. Small leafed ilexes. They will grow quite nicely in pots and provide color all year long. And here is pencil holly, underplanted with hostas, and those need to be, I need to thin that. They've gotten entirely too big. And tucked underneath it, see a little better here, a chrysanthemum, another seasonal plant. Clip it back so it doesn't bloom too soon, but I will have fall color underneath there. And that is something that year round will give me color all year long. Now, up here, I have a plant. This is the mock orange, which I'm going to cut back. This is the bouncing bet, which has gotten to be a little invasive. But right back here, that is a peony. It has a white bloom. I've seen it bloom twice, years and years and years ago. But these plants have gotten so huge that my peony no longer blooms. Its leaves seem happy enough, but it's not blooming. So when I find something that's in the wrong spot, and that is definitely in the wrong spot, I look up transplanting peonies. I have never transplanted them successfully. I've never had good luck. A lot of people say they're impossible to transplant. But what I read was transplant them in September. So I'm going to be transplanting a lot of my peonies in September, and we'll see if that's good advice or not. But when something's in the wrong spot, it's not going to do well. It's not going to thrive. So I'm going to put that in a sunnier spot in front of my house where I've got my sunniest locations, and I'm going to see if I can't get that to bloom. Give it lots of good compost, lots of sunshine, and see what I can do with that. Other things that you can do to overwinter. I don't do this because I'm just really basically lazy. Dahlia tubers can be dug up. Caladiums can be dug up. Elephant ears can be dug up. I've tried to do elephant ears and they just rotted. But you know, if you're into that sort of thing, again, those are plants that become free. Or if you have a gardening friend who doesn't plan on doing it, you can offer to dig them up for them and overwinter them and then share what you have at the end of the season, when spring comes around again. So get to know your gardeners. There's so many ways. Gardening is one of those things that when you start to garden, you can engage with an entire community and learn so much from one another, and you don't have to spend an absolute fortune. Okay, now I want to show you something else. Let's see if I can get a little closer in here. This is my mountain laurel. You are witnessing a small miracle. This plant was cut back, I don't know if you can see that or not. When they put the stone up on my house, they cut that plant back completely, and I practically cried. They said we had to. We couldn't get to the stone. We couldn't put our scaffolding up. But it very slowly over the years put up a branch, and finally this year it's blooming. And this one is the white one. Now they built the scaffolding starting from this corner of the house. Started on the far side, came around this corner, built the scaffolding, and when they got to this side, I stood out here and yelled and screamed and stomped my foot and said, "Don't you dare cut this down." They said, "We have to cut it back." So they cut it back. This is the pink mountain laurel. Such a beautiful plant. Now I'll get a little closer here. Okay, I just think this is the most interesting flower. But you can see the buds here. It makes these funny little pointy shapes. That's the bud. And then they kind of inflate, kind of like a balloon. And then they open up. So you can see all three of them right there in that one. And by the time they get really opened up, they're just beautiful. I absolutely love the mountain laurel. And again, you can see this one was cut back not as badly as the other one, but the other one actually was a bigger plant, and this one has done better simply because it was not cut back as much. So that's a great fun thing. Love my mountain laurel. Give you a little update on my pathway. My husband's been very busy with work, so we've kind of made a little bit of a pause in our retaining wall, but I want to show you what's going on here. So obviously cinder block is not the most attractive building material. So I have taken the liriope, the monkey grass, from the back, and I've divided it. These liriope, oh goodness, that's a mess. All of this liriope, all the way down there. This was in, I think, just the tops of 2. That's how much I got out of there. Again, giving it more space, it just opens right up. But along the pathway in the back, this was the liriope that was filling in the tops of cinder blocks back there. The other thing we did was we took the runners, or the vinca, and we're hoping this will cover it up and mask it a little bit. But these, especially where it's 2 cinder blocks tall, I have an idea for covering that in an attractive way. Now, nothing is going to want to grow down because this is the north side. So everything's going to want to grow up and towards the neighbor's yard. So what in the world can I plant on the north side of this retaining wall? If you've ever had Boy Scout training or Girl Scout training, you know what grows on the north side. So that's what we'll be doing here. But again, just dividing what I have, recycling cinder blocks. All that we had to buy was paving base and the crushed stone. Everything else, recycled materials. Keep them out of the landfill. Now, a lot of gardening channels have some affiliation with a nursery or a plant grower, and they get all these truckloads of, we've got this delivery coming, and all these plants show up that they're getting for either free or a fraction of what the rest of us would pay. And that's not happening for me. I have to give a little shout out to Color Blends. They did give me my tulips and my daffodils and my alliums, and boy, do I ever appreciate that. And their prices are good, their selections are good. I don't have any problem endorsing them. But everything else, this is sweat equity, literally sweat equity in my garden. And you don't have to spend a fortune to have a beautiful garden. Thanks so much for joining me today. And hopefully you've gotten some ideas and you've get a little get-to attitude where you can do this. I know you can do this. You don't have to spend a fortune. Thanks for coming along, and I'll see you soon.